right at us tonight, and it is February.
Hey everyone,
Right.
we're about to start an event at 7:30. It's going to be on the Wheelabrator Incinerator. It's presented by the Energy Justice Network. How many people have been to Red Emmons before? Anybody who doesn't know, Red Emmons is a worker cooperative, collectively managed. But tonight's event is going to be presented by Dante Swinton, and it's going to be on the Wheelabrator Incinerator in about Southwest Baltimore. So give it up for Dante.
My name is Dante Swinton. I'm a grad student at the University of Baltimore. I also work for the Energy Justice Network. I've got a number of my colleagues here tonight, so if I can't answer any questions when we get to that section, they'll answer them for you. So we're going to talk about the Wheelabrator Incinerator, as my friend just mentioned. So here is a map of continental United States. As you can see, you can barely see the Northeast here because of all the incineration markers. But before we go much more in depth about incineration, I want to talk briefly about landfills. Now, can someone tell me what are some of the issues with landfilling in our country?
Running out of space.
Okay, running out of space, so yeah. Someone back there?
They leak.
They leak, exactly, okay. Basically, the issues are they leak, they straight up stank, of course, you know, and they are very massive and expensive, and they always eventually leak, which gets into groundwater and can cause a lot of pollution. So, in the late 1970s into the 1980s, there was a greater love affair for incineration because of all the growth that you see in the Northeast and ongoing growth in the Northeast. There needed to be a faster way of getting rid of our waste. So once people started moving towards incineration, people started to realize a couple of things. One, incineration is the most expensive form of waste management as well as energy production in our country. Not only do you have to actually build a facility, and the one down in Westport was a $200 million project in the mid-'80s, but you have to deal with all the pollution controls that go with it. So those build more and more cost into the actual operation and management, and that leads to a lot of money having to be put out mostly by the cities that they're in. Some areas have gone into bankruptcy because of their incinerators, such as Harrisburg, PA, just up the road. Detroit's had issues near bankruptcy with their incinerator, and you can see toward the beginning of the 90s, people started fighting against these incinerators and that the costs were proving too much for a lot of communities. So you see this steady decline. And what we want to see in Baltimore City is that we become part of this steady decline on incineration. Now, the next slide. Okay, so here is a map of the Baltimore City. But as you can see, there are hundreds of neighborhoods in Baltimore City, well over 100. But when it comes to data sharing, Baltimore City actually puts everything into what are called community statistical areas, or CSAs. And so there are 55 of those. As you can see, in North Reservoir Hill are put together, Hamden, Remington, Woodbury, all of them are put together. But down here at the bottom, in 2007 or 2008, that section, particularly Curtis Bay and Brooklyn, had the highest levels of toxic air emissions in the entire country for their zip code for those 2 straight years. So right under your noses, this city has had to experience a heavy load of toxic emissions. 20 and 21 million tons of toxic air emissions released from the Curtis Bay zip code in 2007 and 2008. And since then, they've still been in the top 80. So it's an ongoing affair. And so that's why I circled this general area, because that's where most of the industry is in Baltimore City. And then the blue circle relates to where Wheelabrator Incinerator is in Westport. And so we're going to go more in depth about that right now. Most communities in Baltimore City have a very high unemployment rate in the double digits, as you can see. And of course, the poverty rate does nearly a quarter of families living in Westport are dealing with poverty. What's unfortunate is that 75%, or nearly 75%, of the residents in this area of Baltimore have a high school diploma or less. So they have fewer opportunities to get better paying jobs, and that's something that we hope to change by actually moving toward a zero waste economy. We're going to talk about mortality here twice tonight, but first off, the life expectancy there in Westport had just managed to get over the 70s over the last couple of years. It mostly had been in the 60s. Curtis Bay and Brooklyn, just for comparison, still average about 69 years of life in that area. Now there's a stat here, total annual years of potential life loss, and years of potential life loss relates to the number of years one passes away before the age of 75. That's the standard life expectancy for people in the United States, so at least the government standards. So if I were to die at 70, that'd be 5 years of potential life loss for me, and as you can see, Westport ranks 40th. Now the avoidable deaths one is also really interesting because avoidable deaths means of the 5 neighborhoods in Baltimore City that make $75,000 or more and have life expectancies of around 81 to 83 years of age. If everyone actually had access to the same kind of health care that these particular neighborhoods would, then half of the deaths that occur before age 75 in Westport actually would be avoided. And that's a really huge fact. And as you can see, it's 45th of those 55 CSAs I mentioned, so it's a very problematic situation. Clearly something's going on, and we're going to talk more about that. Okay, so here's our favorite mayor ever. It says, this contractual partnership with Wheelabrator through the Northeast Maryland Waste Disposal Authority will further the city's sustainability goals, promoting a healthy environment and effective long-term waste management of the city's solid waste. That is such a lie, and I'm about to tell you why. So some general information on the incinerator. It came along in 1985, so it's been around for about pushing 31 years now. It can burn up to 2,250 tons daily, although it rarely does. And if it runs at capacity, it can produce 60 megawatts of power. But most incinerators have a lot of malfunctioning issues, hence that cost I was talking about earlier. And so they have to shut down, start up, and shut down again, and everything. And so they never really actually produce that amount of power. They actually receive waste and burn waste 24/7. So whether or not we're actually sending them something, they are burning waste in the middle of the night, polluting our community. The current contract is the second contract the city has been under. It started in July 2011, runs to 2021, and so we feel like 5 years out, this is the perfect time to actually start saying, you know what, we're actually better off doing something different. Hopefully we can get enough people to support that idea. Okay, so basically how it works, we send them all of our trash. Anything that's considered trash or put in the trash cans at your home goes to one of the transfer stations and eventually finds itself at Wheelabrator. Sometimes it will go to Quarantine Road directly, but most of the time it goes there. Anytime we pay per ton, that's known as a tipping fee. If you ever hear that term, that's what they're talking about. Once we actually send it there, they do burn the trash, collect some of the heat, and try to run a turbine to produce a bit of power. They also create a lot of toxic ash left over from all the chemicals within the trash that we just gave them. And so for the majority of the contract, we actually paid them twice. We paid them once to take the trash, then we paid them again to get power back. Right now, there's a 2-year period where we're kind of swapping some money for the cost of power, but that's a little too complex for tonight. For most of the time, we've had involvement with them. We paid them on 2 different occasions, which is kind of nuts. And as mentioned, the ash incinerator goes to Quarantine Road landfill. It's actually most of the waste that gets sent to Quarantine Road, so all of that toxic ash can blow away and litter onto different roads and even into the outer harbor. And that's one of the reasons they no longer can actually use ash to cover the landfill material in Quarantine Road. Okay, so let's remember, incineration is not wasted energy. It is in fact a waste of energy. For one, you can't change matter into something. So first law of thermodynamics, of course, and when they talk about this idea of waste energy, all you're doing is really producing ash and producing gases. And those gases either go and run that turbine or they get emitted into our atmosphere from that white smoke that says Baltimore on the side. So they're not taking waste to energy. But it's also a waste of energy because if you think about it, if we're going to go and cut down some trees, produce them, take them to a mill, burn coal and what have you to actually process the paper, and then use it and then send it to a Wheelabrator to burn. We have to keep doing that, and that's more and more energy, more and more emissions from all these different transports and facilities being run. And that is in fact a waste of energy. When in fact, if we recycled and composted the majority of the stuff that we sent there, we would actually save 3 to 5 times more energy than we produce by just burning it at Wheelabrator. So that's always key to remember. You'll hear waste energy a lot when anyone tries to put that in someone's community. Next slide. This is the amount of waste that was actually sent to Wheelabrator a few years back. As you can see, Baltimore City actually sends about 56% of the waste that's sent there every year. But you've got all these other jurisdictions like Baltimore County, St. Mary's, Howard, and all that actually sent Wheelabrator trash as well. But if you think about it, we're actually having to be subjected to the pollution of other people, not even people within our city limits. That doesn't make any sense, and that is a clear form of environmental racism. So 44% of this stuff that gets kicked out into the air, you can attribute to everywhere else but us, and that community in particular, Westport, even Curtis Bay and Cherry Hill, have to suffer from that. And quite honestly, whichever way the wind blows that day. So most of the time you don't see any smoke coming out of Wheelabrator. Now that is because by law, they actually can't burn visibly. And I think it's the idea of being out of sight, out of mind. People are going to complain more if they see black smoke or things of that nature. So if you don't see anything, you don't really think about it. And that's kind of how they get away with people actually choosing to complain and say, you know, we actually don't want this in our neighborhood. So we're going to talk about the actual pollutants here. So the 10th largest incinerator in the country, and yet it finds itself number 2 in sulfur dioxide, number 2 in formaldehyde, hydrochloric acid, and number 7 in mercury. But once we start breaking it down closer and closer to home, you've got number 4 in mercury, number 4 in hydrochloric acid, and number 11 in nitrogen monoxide. As you can see, it is actually the number one polluter in the entire city of Baltimore. 89% of the mercury that comes from, that is emitted into our air comes from Wheelabrator. Number 88 for hydrochloric acid and sulfur dioxide. Now, of course, we know mercury is a neurotoxin. It can affect your nervous system, can affect digestive issues, things of that nature. Hydrochloric acids corrode the skin and the eyes as well, and mucus in the brains. And sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide I'm going to go into sooner, a couple of slides from now. And as well, PM2.5, we'll talk about that as well. One of the things I don't have on here is lead. And as we know, if we've been watching the news lately, you have a lot of situations going down in Flint with its lead prices in the water. Here, it's an air problem. So in 2005, Wheelabrator released 1,000 pounds of lead into the Baltimore City's air. And as recently as 2008, they released about 500 pounds. What's crazy is that the Maryland Department of the Environment actually doesn't require Wheelabrator to talk about or to disclose the amount of lead that it releases. And so you actually have to go searching for it to get that data. And there are a lot of different government entities that say that they produce this amount of lead, and there's some that say they produce this amount of lead for the same year. So there's some sketchy stuff going on in terms of the actual disclosure, which is very troubling. I need 3 friends to do a demonstration for me right now. Okay, you're the blade of grass. All right, you 2 are molecules. So I need you to link arms with the blade of grass. On each side, thank you. Okay, so they are 2 molecules, and I'll tell you which molecules they are in just a second. She's the blade of grass, and I am the hungry cow. And so as I go through the field, I'm eating all this lovely grass, but I come upon more grass that happens to have these molecules of dioxin, which is the most toxic chemical known, human-made chemical that we know of. And it builds up in the system and can cause a lot of nervous system issues. And what happens is that whenever dioxins or leads are actually emitted into the atmosphere, they will rain down, but they don't wash away or anything. They actually just land on pieces of grass like my friend here. And then cows or any sort of other animal or whatever that might eat that end up taking in all these molecules of dioxin because it doesn't go anywhere. It's lipophilic. That means it's fat-loving. So as the hungry cow, I come along, eat this grass, all this dioxin is starting to build into my system. And so if you are a meat eater, whether it be beef or poultry, that is the main way that you actually get dioxin in your system. And as it builds in your system, it can cause a lot of damage, cause a lot of nervous system problems. It can actually enhance your lifetime cancer risk from 1 in a million, which is the standard rate, to 500 to 1,000 in 1 million. And so that is a major change, of course. In pregnant women, since the fetus is very, very vulnerable at that point, you're actually taking in a lot of these toxins and they are transferred to the fetus. But once the child is actually born, if you do breastfeed for no fault of your own, within the first 6 months of breastfeeding a newborn, 20% of all the toxins that are built up in your system like dioxin are transferred to the newborn. And so thank you, blade of grass and molecules. So who here knows or suffers from asthma or any sort of lung ailment? Okay, lots of hands, as I figured as much. So we're going to talk asthma incinerators now. Okay, so as I talked about PM2.5, PM2.5 is a particulate matter in the size of it is 2.5 microns across, and that's where the 2.5 comes in. But it's so small that it actually gets inside of your lungs and can start to cause a lot of havoc. It's one of the main concerns when it comes to pollution in the urban areas. Sulfur dioxide is an irritant as well as nitrogen oxide. You hear a lot about those when it comes to ground level ozone. And anyone that has asthma certainly has to face these on a daily basis and much more susceptible to having any sort of attack when they are about. So even though children are only a quarter of the U.S. population, they account for 40% of asthma diagnoses, and that's because they're still in development. Their lungs have not brought up the defenses that adults might have. And so you're going to see a lot more diagnoses for them along the way, and that's very problematic because, as you see, it's the leading cause of absenteeism in Baltimore schools. So not only do we have this issue of being able to supply clean water in East Baltimore because of lead in the pipes there, or not having air conditioning in Baltimore schools, you now have to deal with the asthma epidemic, causing people to have less and less opportunity to succeed in school, and then now perpetuating the cycle of poverty. In 2011, Mayor Rawlings Blake put together what she called Healthy Baltimore 2015. And in that report, she wanted to analyze the health disparities between white and black citizens and whatnot. And clearly there are quite a number of them. But in the interim report, this particular data set is the number of emergency department discharges related to asthma in these two data sets. This is from 2013. They haven't released the final report yet. As you can see, there's usually about a 5-to-1 health disparity between white citizens and black citizens in the city of Baltimore when it comes to little black children in Baltimore City at the highest rate of visitation to the emergency room related to asthma. And that's very problematic. We know that there's a problem here when you see such great discrepancies, and the fact of the matter is that that is the largest number. It got worse from 2010 to 2012, and it's very troubling. So here in Westport, heart disease, of course, is the #1 killer in the United States. It's no different in Baltimore City, no different in Westport. And once again, it contributes about 16% of potential years of potential life loss, and it accounts for about a quarter of the deaths every year in Baltimore City, or at least in that neighborhood. So cancer is a little bit better in a sense. We're all in lung cancer because we have been talking about lung ailments. But I brought stroke and chronic respiratory disease on to the screen as well, because just last year, the British Medical Journal released a study that said even 1 day of subjection to these types of pollutants, whether it's sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, things of that nature, and particulate matter, just 1 day of being subjected to that drastically increases your chance of a stroke in your lifetime. And so even though there's only 8.4 per 10,000 deaths stroke related in the Westport and Mount Lyons area, that's actually 52nd of the 55 CSAs that I talked about earlier. So it's clearly most, and clearly they're being affected by the types of pollution facilities that are down there. And we're talking the incinerator, we're talking oil and petroleum plants, other chemical companies, coal plants, and everything like that. So chronic respiratory diseases, asthma, COPD, emphysema, things of that nature, you have a situation where that's the city is 40, the neighborhood is 46 of 55 CSAs comes to that mortality rate. So we're going to have Queen Bee talk to us about bills. We've been talking so much about the actual pollution that goes down in Baltimore City, particularly in the Mount Lyons, Westport, Lakeland area. But now we're actually going to talk the costs related to it. So this is data I got from the Department of Public Works for Baltimore City. These are the numbers they sent over to me. I'm like, okay, cool. So as you can see, we send an average of 200,000 tons or so. I feel like they probably aren't as perfect as they say they are on that, but we'll go with it. And you can see the tipping fees I mentioned earlier, and they gradually increase over the years. So in the last 4 years, we spent $38 million to burn our waste, and before we even purchased power bag. $38 million, when in the last two was $19 million. And that got me to thinking, what exactly could we do with $19 million? We could actually buy the 1989 album for the entire country of Estonia for $19 million. That's one option with this amount of money. Pull one of the old rivals of the Baltimore Ravens from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He used to do his Head & Shoulders commercial. We could insure his hair an additional 19 times as another option. What I think we could do, actually invest in anaerobic digestion, recycling, composting facilities, and hire 275 Baltimoreans for $15 an hour full time. Now, I do think that that's probably the most valid reason way to use $19 million instead of burning it at Wheelabrator. Okay, so we're going to talk the zero waste movement now. Who can tell me what they've heard of zero waste and what they think it's related to? Zero waste, zero waste.
It's this overall philosophy of, as a society, we could make it so that we could recycle over 80 or 90% of our waste instead of sending it to incinerators.
Right, zero waste is a concept. It's the idea of being able not to send what we use in everyday life to incinerators, to landfills, and actually reuse it in some capacity. Whether that be for compost, or whether that be just for the same purpose it had been before, but at least we recycle it versus sending it off to burn and then go into the air. The idea of designing and managing products and processes to systematically avoid and eliminate the volume and toxicity of wasted materials, conserve and recover all resources, and not burn or bury them. For instance, in my Sustainable Communities class, we had a book called Cradle to Cradle that actually talks about this, and I mentioned this earlier, the whole cradle to grave scenario when we we take materials out of the forest, we process them, we use them, and then we burn them. It's a cradle to grave type of situation. But the cradle to cradle book was actually a plastic material that could be turned into carpet fibers, which then could be turned back into the book, which then could be turned into carpet fibers. So it was infinitely reusable. And when it comes to zero waste, the idea is that we do start creating stuff that we no longer have to dispose of, and we change the language from waste to discards. The benefits, of course, more jobs and less pollution. And from a report from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, it turns out that for every 10,000 tons of material we use, if we composted 10,000 tons of material, that would create 4 jobs. If we landfill, that would only be 2, and if we incinerated, that would be 1 job per 10,000 tons of material. And Wheelabrator only employs 60 people or so, and only a handful of them actually live in Westport. So they're not even providing any economic opportunity as it is on top of all the pollution they're providing. And in 2014, Maryland adopted a zero waste plan itself. And in that, within the next 24 years or so, the goal is to divert at least 80% of the waste that we have, cycle at least 80% of that. And when it comes to food scraps, organic waste, 90%. But when it comes to Baltimore City, they want to keep Wheelabrator around for an additional 20 years. So that means 50 years of pollution from this one site. I'm totally cool with that. As part of our primary waste of solid waste disposal, we find that insanely problematic because now it's essentially saying we're totally cool with continuing to make people suffer from this type of facility without actually considering other ideas sooner than later. Beginning of this month, or the end of this month, actually beginning of next month, the city is actually going to start distributing trash cans to everyone because not everyone actually has a trash can. And so it's going to cost the city about $8 million, but they're going to give everyone these rolling trash carts that you've probably seen around. If you don't already have a trash can, you probably don't have anything to put your recycling in, and so people might be more incentivized to go and move forward with putting everything in just the one bin, which is problematic. So we're going to expand Quarantine Road. That's the landfill I mentioned earlier, and the city already still owes $17 million for the existing landfill. But the idea is that they want to take Quarantine Road landfill here, build across the existing Quarantine Road into this old industrial landfill, so that way, instead of reaching capacity in 2026, they can reach capacity in 2052. What I hear from that is that we're not actually going to consider alternative ways of dealing with our waste. We're just going to go with these antiquated options, which, as people said earlier, leak, smell, take up so much space, all of that. So it's kind of ridiculous that that is on the table for the city to move forward with. Here, Baltimore City's recycling rate is 29.7%. That's pretty low. In comparison to, like, say, San Francisco, they have about a 70% recycling rate. There's a number in parentheses because we actually get 5 credit points to our recycling rate for having that incinerator. Technically, it's getting rid of waste because it's now diminishing the volume since it just got burned. And so Maryland is giving us 5 extra points for that, which is insane. It's not renewable in any way, shape, or form. But we were mandated last year to reach 35% recycling rate. As of right now, as I speak to you, DPW has not indicated that we reached that. So we're still struggling to get to that point. Okay, so our proposed solutions are to give people these free recycling bins, what have you, or the larger recycling bins, the yellow ones that are 25 gallons. You know, this has to make a free campaign. I'm going to go in depth about that in just a second. We'd also like to provide the same or larger bins to businesses at discounted rates because they do produce a lot of waste, whether that be bottles and glass and things of that nature, or in yard trimmings or what have you. I'd implement Charm City Smart. Smart is save money and reduce trash. The idea is that the city would now charge per bag of waste thrown away. And any city that's actually implemented, they've seen a 44% decrease in every single city that's actually implemented this type of system. So it causes the city to save a lot of money. If there's any landfilling or anything of that nature nearby, there's less stuff going to the landfill, less stuff going to the incinerator. So we would like to look at that as well. Passing a clean air ordinance. That would mean that we would but require Wheelabrator to monitor some of those toxins I talked about earlier on the Harm City slide. They actually only monitor for carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxide. And there weren't just 3 things that I posted on that slide. So clearly there's an issue there. They actually get tested only once a year, so they could be in violation for all we know any other day. But they also know the day that they're going to be tested. So it's basically giving this facility an open book test once a year. These last little bits here open a material recovery facility, a MRF, or a material recovery biological treatment facility. I'll talk about those in just a second. Composting or anaerobic digestion. So material recovery facilities are essentially taking trash that hasn't already been sent through the recycling stream and pulling out the stuff that actually is still recyclable out of that. So there's less stuff going toward landfill or wherever else it may go. The MRVT is just like that, except that it has a component of getting rid of the organic waste, so digesting it in some capacity, perhaps composting some of the remaining material or turning some of the biogas from that into energy. Yeah, and then of course we want people to push for not renewing the Wheelabrator contract. It's a very big goal, but I think that if we actually manage to show that there are so many more job opportunities, so many other ways and cheaper ways at that to be able to dispose of our waste, this is a much feasible thing in the next 6 years. Okay, so I'm going a little bit more in depth on the Make It Free campaign. Free 25-gallon household bins for everyone in the city. This is the ideal, the 210,000 households distributed to everybody. But we would start with a pilot program more than likely in 4 different neighborhoods with lower recycling rates. Make sure they have a bin and then make the connection between what happens when you don't actually throw this waste into a recycling bin or discard it in a recycling bin. And when you do, it leads to more pollution from the Wheelabrator Incinerator. If everyone recycled 1.29 pounds daily, or an additional 1.29 pounds daily, right now the city recycles about, per person, 2/3 of a pound a day, then we could divert nearly a quarter of the waste that we dispose of that I showed you on that tipping fee sheet. And that is massive. That is a lot of material that the city would then need more people to handle, so that means more jobs that don't require any high bachelor's degrees or anything of that nature for people. And that would be very powerful. And of course, a video campaign showing people have very little interest in the idea of their city continuing to be polluted. So before we go over to questions or whatever, I have been speaking with a lot of Baltimore City government folks over the last couple months, and I tend to hear a lot of, well, Baltimore's too different to do something like this, you know, it's just too different. When I hear that, I hear Baltimore's too poor and too black. And that is very problematic. I think there's a situation where we feel Baltimore City just doesn't have a chance to make a difference and to do something else that can actually bring people out of poverty. And by actually investing in the zero waste economy and moving in that direction, you're clearly going to diminish pollution. You're going to be able to create the jobs with the new waste that's no longer being incinerated. And that's the way to move forward. So when I hear the difference and everything, and knowing that Baltimore does have its economic struggles, I do see much more opportunity than a lot of people in government actually give Baltimore credit for. And I think by doing presentations like this tonight, hopefully you do too. So, thank you all for listening to me.